Hello, this is part 2 of a series of videos about the fundamental theories and practices that should always be considered when creating a computer-assisted language learning environment based on widely accepted educational theory and practice. The videos were originally recorded for use in one particular class, but I'm making them available in other settings because I think other people may be interested as well. So in this video, the first 3 of the 9 can I do that again? Start over. Hello, this is part 2 of a series of videos about the fundamental theories and practices that should always be considered when creating a computer-assisted language learning environment based on widely Hello, this is part 2 of a series of videos about the fundamental theories and practices that should always be considered when creating a computer-assisted language learning environment based on widely accepted educational theory and practice. The videos were originally recorded to be used in one particular class, but I'm making them available in other settings as well. So in this video, the first 3 of the 9 foundational concepts that we identified in our study by the methodology described back in video number 1 are going to be discussed. They are reverse engineering of educational requirements from outcome goals, affordance-based learning design, and constructivism embodied in student-centered active learning. Engineering is, so the first is reverse engineering of instructional requirements from outcome goals. Engineering is the process of designing a system that fulfills specific outcome goals or requirements. Now, we talk about building a highway bridge, which has to be able to carry so many vehicles with so much weight in so many lanes of traffic. We have specific things our design needs to be able to do. And of course, there needs to be a big safety margin. Well, in education, we can also engineer a system to fulfill specific outcome goals. Therefore, educational engineering is an evidence-based way of creating instructional and technology designs to allow students to achieve required outcomes and to meet their needs. So therefore, curriculum engineering must begin with outcome goals connected to the needs of students and the required outcome goals. Dornier advocated that language learning curriculum design should begin with agreed upon learning outcomes resulting from researching the knowledge and the skills that students need when they graduate. Then Dornier said curriculum designers should work backwards to reverse engineer learning activities that will allow students to achieve those outcomes. They should be designed to be used over multiple semesters, not just once, and the learning activities should be theory-based. So Dornier's approach resonates with concepts of strategic planning across many disciplines. Planning is always best accomplished when it has established outcome requirements. The planning in this case is for language teaching and learning, and it concerns how to achieve desired outcomes. Joseph Colpert, the editor of the prestigious computer-assisted language learning academic journal, has said that if we're going to work this way, an educational engineering approach, there are questions we need to ask ourselves as we begin. And the questions he listed are, how can we convince teachers to engage themselves in student-centered instruction? How can we plan in a way that's more methodical and systematic with external validity to ensure that we're doing quality planning? How can we integrate both theoretical and practical past learning, research findings and experiences? How can we fit these all together? How can we design solutions which yield measurable and clear learning? And how can we minimize unexpected factors that could jeopardize the design? Now, I can't give you the answers to any of these questions because you have to ask them about yourselves and your personal and professional situation, your school, your class, but they are things to ponder. And so let's talk about these external factors a little more. This model of internal and external factors affecting call learning is too complex to go into detail here. This model of internal and external factors affecting call learning is too complex to go into here in detail, but it shows that there are many factors that affect outcomes of an instructional design. Some are on the student side and some are on the school side. Some are internal and some are external. A teacher or an instructional designer can't account for all of these things, but we need to identify the most important, the most influential factors that actually operate in our overall learning environment, our language learning environment. And we have to determine those which actually affect outcomes the most, and those are the ones that we need to try to control. They'll probably be different at every school and with different kinds of students, which is why evidence-based research may be needed. But here's a hypothetical example that kind of illustrates how this might work and that there are so many factors. Let's imagine an EFL student and the student's grandparent may go into the hospital unexpectedly. That means that the student's presence at the hospital is required. You have to be there for family, meaning that the student has insufficient time to study for a test, meaning that the student does poorly on the test and receives a low grade, meaning that the student's motivation drops, meaning that the student's actual skill doesn't keep pace with the others in the class, meaning that the student performs poorly on TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language, or whatever test is taken. And that means that the student has reduced employment opportunities after graduation. Now, that's an extreme case, but at each individual step, the outcome is within the bounds of something that is possible, reasonably likely. So it illustrates how unpredictable the overall learning context can be. So reverse engineering, as Dornier talked about, means working backwards from outcome goals. It means using evidence-based outcome goals. So we have to find out, not just guess, we need to know, what is the marketplace? What do prospective employers expect from our graduates? A lot of teachers who teach traditionally but use technology, they choose the technology first. I'm going to use such and such. And then they brainstorm, try to figure out how to use it. But in the standard model that we're talking about today, we choose technology after we identify the needed learning activities, and we choose the technology that will best deliver those learning activities and tasks and allow the student to succeed. It's likely different technology for different kinds of learning tasks. So again, it's important that the technology is chosen after the goals and after the instructional strategies. Here's an example that mixes several different tasks that might best be done face-to-face with tasks that might be best done via technology. Now, these are just some examples. You may have different ideas about what tasks can be done, about what technology should be used, the best ways to accomplish learning activities. And I understand this is kind of small. If you happen to be watching this on your phone or a portable device, not a full-size screen, you might actually want to pause the video right now and zoom in a little bit and read some of these. Because language teaching and learning is ultimately measured by levels of student success, reverse engineering of instructional requirements from outcome goals represents an important starting place for the standard model of call. The second of the theories, part of the standard model, is affordance-based learning design. In call, the affordances are the benefits or the capabilities a given teaching tool or method offers, including tools such as comprehensive learning management systems. A standard social media platform could be used, a smartphone app, conventional web-based systems. The term could apply to any kind of support materials used for elements of the class that may be in person or that might not otherwise use technology, or even it could apply to selection of textbooks if you and your individual school is allowed to do that. Even old school lecture by a teacher has certain affordances, but they also come with rules as to how to best use lecture. For example, lecturing for an hour or two is not the best way because students will be bored and tune out what you're saying. Short sections of lecture fitted in with other kinds of activities are much better. So there are affordances, and you need to know how to make use of those affordances. But we need to start by remembering that technology itself does not result in learning. The question is, how is the technology used? A scholar named Gibson was the first to outline this affordance theory way back in 1977, saying that any kind of object or element in the environment is understood based on how it operates, and therefore how it can be used. So in other words, the object that we're talking about provides or affords possibilities for use or action toward a stated goal. So the object is understood not just based on its features or its characteristics, what does it look like, but rather its potential to be used effectively for the purpose that we have in mind. Now, when we apply this to educational engineering, to educational engineering, to the learning environment, therefore, the affordance Now, when we apply this to a learning environment, it is an educational tool or technique that is understood in terms of its potential to be used effectively. Leaders in the field of computer-assisted language learning have been advocating for some time for research methods that determine the affordances that a given instructional tool or method can provide toward achieving our educational and learning outcome goals. And that's as opposed to experimental research in which differences are looked at, comparing what a tool is used, or a tool or method, when it's used or is not used. Affordance-based research is increasingly seen as better than control group experimental methodologies because in experimental studies, it's often hard to reproduce the findings of a control group experiment. And affordances, it's easier to confirm affordances that someone else identified, and therefore have more confidence in the outcomes of the research. So here is a model showing educational engineering. I'm going to do that whole thing. I'm going to do that whole thing again. A scholar named Gibson originally outlined affordance theory way back in 1977, saying that any kind of object or element in the environment is understood based on how it operates and therefore how it can be used. In other words, this object provides or affords possibilities of use or action towards a stated goal. Therefore, the object is understood not based on its features and characteristics, not just what it looks like, but rather on its potential to be used effectively for a purpose we have in mind. In the context of an educational learning environment, therefore, it is an educational tool or technique understood in terms of its potential to be used effectively. Leaders in the computer-assisted language learning field have been A scholar named Gibson first outlined affordance theory way back in 1977, saying that any kind of object or element in the environment is understood based on how it operates and therefore how it can be used. In other words, the object provides or affords possibilities of use or action towards a stated goal. Therefore, the object is understood not just based on its features or its characteristics, but rather on its potential to be used effectively for the purpose we have in mind. So in the context of a learning environment, therefore, it is an educational tool or technique understood in terms of its potential to be used effectively, not just how it operates, but how it can be used most effectively. Leaders in the computer-assisted language learning field have been advocating for some time for research methods that determine the affordances that a given instructional and learning tool or method can provide towards achieving our educational outcome goals. That's as opposed to research methodologies that are experimental, looking into differences, comparing when a given tool is used or is not used and trying to see if there are differences. Affordance-based research is increasingly seen as better than control group experimental methodologies because reproduction of that kind of research has been difficult, but it's easier to confirm someone else's study of the affordances of a tool, and that means we can have better confidence in the outcomes of the research. Here's a model showing the educational engineering process, and you see that selecting technology is in the middle. The technology is chosen based on understanding of its affordances for language learning. I've been saying this multiple times, but it is important. Again, the technology is chosen based on its value, its known ability to support the needed instructional and learning tasks. We don't choose the learning tasks based on what the technology can do. We don't pick the technology and then try to figure out how to use it in a given class. Selecting the technology by affordances partners really well with reverse engineering of outcomes and is an important element of the standard model of call. The third of the elements of the model we're going to talk about today is constructivism embodied in student-centered active learning. We can't figuratively speak about opening up the heads of students and just pouring in knowledge. Learning happens when students encounter new information and fit it together with what they already know. The more connections between new and existing knowledge, the better they'll be able to use the information because it fits in so well. This is called constructivism, the idea of constructing knowledge by fitting new information together with what is already known. And research study after research study has shown that active learning has better outcomes than lecture memorization and the teacher-centered model. The best way to make connections is by hands-on learning, and learning in which the student has some flexibility about what to learn and how to learn it. So we talk about student-centered active learning. It is active learning based on constructivism that builds confidence through early success. And it's learning that builds motivation, because whenever you succeed, you have more motivation to do the next thing. And that results in better language skills over the long term because we're more motivated to spend time on it. The student-centered structure provides students control over their learning within certain margins, certain limits. It allows them to follow their own interests, and being more interested in what we're learning means working harder, spending more time on it, improving ability, and better outcomes. Now, I have visited Taiwan several times, and it's always my goal when there to give people positive experiences with got to start this one over too. And so we talk about student-centered active learning. It is active learning, hands-on active learning based on constructivism. It builds confidence through helping the student achieve early success, which in turn builds motivation. And when a student is more motivated, they'll result in better language skills over the long term because the student spends more time and is more interested in what's being studied. So the student-centered structure provides students with control over their learning within certain limits to allow them to follow their own individual interests. And being able to do that, more interesting work in class, more interesting learning means the student spends more time, works harder, improves ability, and has better outcomes. Now, I have visited Taiwan several times, and it's always my goal when there to give people positive experiences with the American. A lot of this has to do with language use, but I give positive feedback in other ways too. I smile a lot. I nod yes when I talk to people. My personal goal when I'm in Taiwan and visiting other countries too, is a positive experience with the American. And when it comes to language learning, to give them a positive experience using their English skills at whatever level they're at, to give them that feeling of success, cause them to want to continue studying English, and just think that Americans are nice people. So maybe you can see that this kind of learning still again, got to start this section over. So we talk about student-centered active learning. It is active learning based in constructivism. It builds confidence through helping the student achieve early success, which in turn builds motivation. Early success means I'll be more motivated, and that results in better language skills over the long term. The student-centered structure provides students some control over their learning within margins. It allows them to follow their own interests, which means they'll be more interested. And that means, again, they'll work harder, their ability will improve, and they'll have better outcomes. Now, I visited Taiwan several times, and it's always my goal when I'm there to give people positive experiences with the American. A lot of that has to do with language use, but I give positive feedback in other ways too. I smile a lot. I nod yes when they say something, when people talk with me. And it's my personal goal to give, particularly language students I interact with, a positive experience with using their language skills at whatever level they're at. By giving them that feeling of success, they're actually able to communicate with the American. That causes them to want to study English more. And of course, I want them to think Americans are nice people too. So maybe you can see that this is kind of a learning through social interaction also. It's hard for one person alone to process new information. Social interaction allows us to compare our understanding back and forth. We create our explanation, our definition, and put the ideas in words. That's a learning process. We actively explain to others. That's a learning process, both for us and for them. We receive their feedback, which is learning for them and for us, hearing their explanations, and that helps build connections in our mind. If you think about it, this is how young children learn their native language. People always use pretty simple language with very young children, and the children actively fill in the gaps of words they know, either just by figuring it out or by asking. And that allows them over time to become more and more capable language learners. And it should be the same with older language learners, students learning by doing, filling in the gaps as we go along, and getting better and better naturally over time. Now, one of the ways we help do that is a technique called scaffolding. Teaching with student-centered active learning is different from other older ways of teaching. Scaffolding means that when using student-centered active learning, teachers provide high levels of support initially as the students perform the early learning tasks, ensuring that they do succeed. But the teachers progressively reduce their support to encourage students to be more independent as they learn to do it better themselves. And constructivism creates these deeper mental connections for the newly learned knowledge and skills. When you think about learning English with technology, many students are already doing this on their own via technology. They may visit English websites, watch English videos, TV shows, movies, read social media posts that are in English. Sometimes young people I know just do this for fun, but sometimes it's specifically for the purpose of improving their English. Either way, you can think of this work on their own as student-centered because they make choices for themselves. They may say, I'm going to watch a TV show or I'm going to watch a YouTube video, but they get to select the subject matter for something that interests them. So it's good justification for moving away from the old lecture memorization way of teaching and into active learning. So those are the first three of the foundational theoretical concepts that we identified that we say should always be considered in planning computer-assisted language learning. Remember, we do not expect that all 9 that we'll end up talking about will be used in every class, in every curriculum, but people planning to teach via call should consider every one of these 9 to see if they offer the affordances needed for their particular situation. In our next video, we will consider the next strategies in the standard model of call instructional design. They are communicative language theory, authentic learning materials and experiences, and incremental learning. The students that are using this video for class should think about what we've talked about and be prepared to have thoughtful, interesting things to say in class, and your teacher may give you specific questions to address also. But I will see you next time. Thank you for being here. Oh, geez.